Hey y'all, do you remember during the sermon we touched actually on a couple books, the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. And those two books talk about all kinds of end time stuff, which is usually pretty intriguing to people. Most ears perk up when one starts to talk about, hey, what's going to happen in the future? And most people are really excited to become experts on what's coming up. I mean, you know how popular you would be as a person if you could tell people what their future holds. You'd no longer be the kid in the back of the classroom getting picked on by all the jocks if you could predict what was coming. Plus, like we've kind of been talking about, there would be a great deal of safety and security in knowing what is going to happen tomorrow. So people are naturally drawn to conversations that entail future events. But most people, when you think about the book of Revelation, you really think about just that. However, maybe not so much when you think about the book of Daniel, even though it's in there. When we think of Daniel, we usually tend to think of some of the other things like Daniel and the lion's den, of course. Daniel's one of my personal favorite stories ever. He's one of my favorite people. There's so much good stuff in the book of Daniel, including predictions and other things. But these video blogs really aren't a place where we can have a full discussion on the things in the book of Daniel. There's so much there, it would take a great deal of time. But he's such a neat guy with so many amazing experiences that we might be able to relate to some of them. And I think it's worth us spending some time this week looking into Daniel's life and the stuff that Daniel went through. Now, the first thing that you want to know about our boy here, Daniel, is that he's not one that went through like a situation that we think of it that would be a great testimony where he went from being a drug addict and a person with a really bad past to a changed man who straightens his life out. That's not really the story of Daniel at all, actually. Daniel probably had a life that most of us could relate to maybe a little bit better than that. It's something that we would feel we've experienced a little bit more. Daniel had a lot. He was brought up with a good deal of wealth and he got a really good education and he was well manicured. He even got his hair cut once a month. Like, remember the good old days when we used to be able to get our hair cut once a month? But really, he was a hardworking, he played hard, he enjoyed the hard work and the fruits of his labor, and he enjoyed things like not worrying about where his next meal would come from. Daniel was going places. And he had a decent career in front of him, and he had things in his life were rolling along probably quite smoothly. And then the bottom dropped out. A pandemic came to his town. It caused a potential economic collapse, forced him to be stuck inside at home where he couldn't hang out with his friends, and made him start doing Zoom meetings instead of having real life interactions. All right, well, that part right there isn't quite exactly how it went down for Daniel. Instead of him having a pandemic, an invading army came to town. Instead of an economic collapse and being stuck inside his home, he actually got taken from his home and got dragged hundreds of miles away and forced to partner with governing officials who were his political enemies. And there were no Zoom meetings. Instead, he was forced to conform to the education and the ideology of the people that captured him. Honestly, I think if you really thought it through, what Daniel went through would make social distancing seem like a walk in the park, if the parks were still open. So what did Daniel do? When all this goes down, what does Daniel do? Well, he went with it. We have no record at all of Daniel complaining or pitching a fit. We have absolutely no record of him having a rant on social media or telling off the Babylonians that disagreed with him. Instead, Daniel simply went with the flow. In fact, not only did he go with the flow, he led people through that flow. He didn't just grin and bear it. He put on his face mask and his latex gloves, because that's what the Babylonians required of him, and he helped others through it. He probably organized a parade so he could throw candy at all of his friends. All right, but really, if we know anything about Daniel, God used Daniel to do some incredibly great things. And I think there's a reason that God used him. It starts with the first characteristic that we see in Daniel, that he was willing to take on whatever challenge was in front of him without feeling sorry for himself. Let me close you with this thought. I bet there's 2 words that never came out of Daniel's mouth. In fact, it's probably because they never entered his mind. Those 2 words: this sucks. 2 words that you and I, would probably do well to remove from our mindsets, whether the Babylonians are forcing us to distance ourselves or not. I want you to think about that today. We'll see you tomorrow.